Okay, welcome to Psycho Bible, Babbling about psychology and theology. I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and I am doing another interview, my second interview ever on my channel. And this is with A.J. Benjamin, the author of the book When the Sun Frees You, A Catholic Man's Journey of Healing from Same-Sex Attraction. And AJ and I corresponded over Facebook like a year or so ago, a couple years now at this point, and started a friendship on Facebook, and he was gracious enough to send me a copy of his book, and I started reading it sometime last year, and then had to put it aside to continue reading some other materials that I was using to prepare for some other videos. And then I'm like, all right, I can't wait to get back to this book because it was really engaging, very well written, and I wanted to. As soon as I finished reading, I'm like, all right, I want to do an interview with AJ and give him a bit of an opportunity to plug his book and share his story. So AJ, actually, if you could maybe share a little bit, just briefly, about who you are, what you do, as well as the ministry that you have going that surrounds the book that you just released not too long ago.
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm glad that we could finally talk in person. I know we've been coordinating for a while, lots of ups and downs, so I appreciate your persistence, and I'm really glad to be able to be here with you. I really admire the work you do for those of us with same-sex attraction, and also I greatly admire, we share a common admiration of John Paul II's theology of the body, so it's really great to see the work that you're doing in that area as well. Just say keep it up. It's in many ways it's being better received now among evangelical circles than it is in Catholic circles. So that's a little bit of, I think, ecumenism at work there, you know?
Yeah, I encountered Theology of the Body back in 2015 when I heard Christopher West speak at the Restored Hope Network conference. And so normally gratefully, what I find is a lot of people who are involved in the whole ex-gay ministry world are familiar with Theology of the Body. And a lot of that has been through the ministry of Christopher West, as well as Andrew Comiskey and Desert Stream Ministries. And I was really happy to see that it's really permeated a lot of the ministries that are out there for people struggling with any sort of sexual identity issues, because it's our foundational worldview and framework that explains what our vision is for sexual reintegration and wholeness. So, and I actually would love to get into that more. I have that as a question to get to ask you more about that later in the interview. So we'll put a pin on that.
Sounds
now,
good.
Your website is thesilentnight.net. Am I correct?
Yes. KNIGHT, all one word. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. And can you just share a little bit about what you're doing on your website and the work you're doing there?
Well, it really came out of it all started back when I actually went on pilgrimage to Fatima in 1996. And that was kind of the beginning of my healing story. And I go more into it in the book, as you know. But, basically, I kind of I made a little bit of a deal with the Lord. I said, if you get me out of here, getting me out of this, I will go and minister to anybody that you send to me and try to help my brothers in any way I can. And I, of course, asked the intercession of the Mother of Jesus, and she kind of did it. She was a good Jewish mother. She really came through, and she introduced me to Jesus, and I just completely changed my life. I just did a complete conversion, complete metanoia, and it's been a long journey, and it's had its ups and downs. It wasn't like an instantaneous, pop or anything like that, but over time I've gradually become more and more aware of my own masculinity, my own masculine identity, and my own sonship as a child of the Father and brother of Jesus Christ. And once I got to that point, I really started feeling the Lord calling me to share that more and more. So I started the website, and I kind of wrote the book over time. I started it back when I was in graduate school at Franciscan University, and I just kind of worked on it over time. I would work on it a lot during Lent. That was like my Lenten penance. So I would sit there and write about my story, for over many Lents. And then finally it got to a point where I started posting it on the website. I started getting a lot of positive feedback. And so I finally said, you know what, I really want to help as many people as possible. I felt the Lord call me to put it in book form. I had a few friends look it over, got some opinions, and then, put it out to see if I could get it published. And, much to my great surprise, somebody actually wanted to publish it. So, it was really quite an experience. So I've left a lot on my website as far as resources and things like that. And then I also, I shortened, somebody else had asked me very recently on Facebook, like, can you give me the short version? So I tried to make it, something you could read in like, about 15, 20 minutes. I have a shorter version of it with fewer details on my website. So if you don't want to read the book, you don't have to, you can still see what I'm all about and what we're doing. But basically, I talk to guys from all over the world, and there's so many people that are seeking this healing and this oneness with Christ and this reconciliation of their own manhood, as you well know from your own work. And it's just I'm glad in whatever small way to serve in the vineyard and to get to be a support and a comfort to as many guys as I can. Try to help them whatever way I can. I don't, although I have a master's in counseling, I'm not a licensed clinician, so I don't do counseling or anything like that. But I try to pass on what I know worked for me, and hopefully that will also work for someone else. And that's what you hear so much against, trying, you can't change your orientation and things like that. And I'm thinking, well, you're all saying that, but if it worked for me, I'm not all that special. Why would it not work for at least someone else? Like it's not rocket science, it's not a magical formula that would just work for one person. So like, that's really the message I'm trying to get out there, is that Jesus loves you. Jesus desires your wholeness and your healing, and he desires to draw you closer to him. How much of a healing happens is between Christ and the other person, and I have no control over that. But my main, I guess, goal is to just get the word out there that, give Christ a chance. Like I think Christopher West always says this, don't empty the cross of Jesus Christ of its power. And that always resonated with me. Like if he is who he says he is, he can do whatever he wants to. So give him a chance. And that's what I try to get out there. That's my message. Give Christ a chance to do whatever he wants to do with you.
So I wanted to actually let me go back a bit here. You're talking about change of orientation. And so I figured, let's actually, before we go into your story, I love how in your book, one of the first chapters is I'm ex-gay, but not really. So can we talk about the terminology? This is one of the things that's very important to me. I always define my terms whenever I talk about this stuff. And you it's practical to use the term ex-gay at times, but it's really not, it's not an ideal term. So,
No.
Could you maybe give maybe some bullet points of the things you were saying in that chapter on the terminology of ex-gay?
Well, what I say is that gay is a label that somebody came up with to describe a certain set of, I guess, desires and conditions and feelings that some men and women experience in their sexuality, where they experience attractions to the same sex. So the word gay is, I mean, it's funny because I when I see it used in literature and things like that, I'm an English teacher by trade, and they're talking about, oh, I'm having a gay time, or I feel really gay today. It's amazing, in just like 60, 70 years, how that term has been co-opted to mean something completely different from what it once meant, which is happy. So it's a label that was chosen, by a particular movement to describe this particular set of phenomena, I should say, to describe this particular phenomenon. What I what I object to is, number one, it doesn't really speak for me. So, because even though I may experience attractions to the same sex, or they may even be predominant attractions to the same sex as they were at one point, that doesn't define who I am. I am a man who has same-sex attraction. I am not a gay man. So that's the one thing. The same problem I find is with ex-gay. Well, if I'm not gay, then I'm not ex-gay either. I'm just a more healed and redeemed version of myself. I mean, I like the self that I am now better than the self that I was before. I feel more whole and more integrated, but I hate to use the term ex-gay any more than I would hate to use the term gay to describe myself, because it just doesn't fit. And that's part of, I think, our problem is we kind of, if we try to identify ourselves by one word, and I understand the idea of convenience. It makes sense because it's a lot easier to just say that than to explain nuances. But even in the teaching of the Catholic Church, it's although there's ministries out there that use that term, it is generally discouraged because it's viewed as reductionistic. Where we're just reducing a person to a particular sexual orientation or a particular set of feelings or desires or things like that. So I don't ever refer to myself as gay or ex-gay. If somebody will say, would you how would you call yourself? I would say I'm a man who has struggled with same-sex attraction. If somebody pushes me to it, will I say I'm ex-gay? Like, would I join an ex-gay ministry? Well, yeah, I guess so, but it doesn't really speak for me completely. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, because it just makes it more complicated when the world has dominated the narrative with their idea that gay is an identity that is necessary for people to adopt if they have predominant same-sex attraction. And so it's like it becomes this constitutional thing that you are, not just something you experience.
Right.
And so when we say ex-gay, that's almost like we're not necessarily saying that you're categorically different from other people. When we say that someone identifies as gay, we're saying they have same-sex attraction to some degree, probably more than opposite sex attraction. So
right.
And so they identify as being gay, that in such a way that they're owning their same-sex attraction as part of who they are and a fundamental part of who they are, and even they're endorsing it. Normally that's what we mean when we say that someone's gay. And so it's socio-political in a lot of its connotations. We're not saying that that's how they actually were created or designed to be, and that's how they're meant to be.
Right.
But the world sees it as, nope, this is who they are. It's the very structure of who they are. So then when we say ex-gay, we're thinking, they're hearing us say that they're no longer that identity, that they've changed categorically. And that's not always the case, as far as like the degrees of attraction may change almost categorically. They may not. But that's not even what we're saying when we say that someone's ex-gay. What we really mean is technically that someone used to identify as gay no longer does. And that was true for a lot of the early ex-gay ministries, because you literally were having people who are living gay lives. They're in gay relationships or homosexual relationships. They identified as gay. A lot of them were former gay activists. And then they were radically transformed when they became born again believers. And so, yeah, they're like, well, I'm not going to identify as anymore. I'm an ex-gay now. And so it made sense for the early leaders in the movement to use that term. But one of the dilemmas I ran into when I was running a support group at my old college was I got guys I worked with who never acted on homosexual thoughts or feelings. They never identified as gay. So for them to say they're ex-gay, it sounds weird. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit their experience necessarily. And that was true for you in the book, that you had the attraction, but I don't remember you ever saying you identified with the attractions and identified as gay?
No, I certainly had attractions, lustful thoughts, desires, all of that. That definitely was a part of it. I never actually was sexually active, but I had everything but that. And so, yeah, so the ex-gay doesn't exactly fit my particular experience. So that's true. That's true. It's a broader. I think it's a broader umbrella than what we were probably used to back in the day. Because back in the day, nobody really ever heard of that, of having that kind of. But it is really a conversion, because whether it's somebody who is addicted to alcohol or drugs or promiscuity or pornography, whether with men or women, that's one of the things that people say is, they kind of use the gay thing as, well, you're a little bit worse of a sinner than I am, because at least, yeah, I might be looking at porn, but at least as women, man, it's that kind of thing. It's, well, no, it's sin is sin. I mean, it's all the Hebrew. Sin is falling short, to fall short, and that's really all falling short. Any kind of sin is bad, and it's not. I think a lot of people like to pin people, and this is a legitimate complaint, I think, from people who identify as gay, is Christians tend to want to kind of scapegoat them as somehow worse sinners than everybody else, sometimes to make ourselves feel better. And that's a probably a correct reaction that somebody would um, see that as offensive, but that's not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is that we're all sinners. We all need the grace of Christ. We all have areas we need to grow in, and because I'm attracted to somebody of my own sex does not make me a special sinner, does not make me a sinner that's entitled to sin, does not make me a worse sinner than everybody else. It just makes me, somebody else once said to me, makes me unique and special, just like everybody else. And that's really what it is. Yeah, we're all unique and special sinners, just like everybody else.
Yep. I like what you say. In the book, there's a part here where you're like, imagine we're talking about how the sort of this criteria that's imposed upon people with unwanted same-sex attraction or ministers to people struggling with this issue is, well, if that person doesn't change categorically or completely have a reversal of their attractions from the same sex to the opposite sex, then the course they took to try to resolve that issue was ineffective or was a waste of their time. And so you're like, imagine if the APA, the American Psychological Association, and other, quote, experts, unquote, said it about any other condition. So you give these examples. You can't change your addiction to drugs. You just have to accept who you are. You can't change your eating disorder. You just have to accept who you are. You can't change your depression. You just have to accept who you are. You can't change your cutting. You just have to accept who you are. And that just really makes the point quite well. When we're talking about homosexuality, we're talking about either a behavior or a tendency toward a behavior, or a draw toward a behavior. We're not talking about an identity. There's nothing necessarily about having attraction to the same sex, for a sexual attraction to the same sex, that really should define who you are. But we got this idea then, when it comes to this, that if you can't change that desire or that attraction, then you have to accept that it is what you are. But we would never say that about some other proclivity.
Right. That's 100% right. We and really the goal is not change of anything. The goal is holiness and conversion. And what change? When we read the gospel, Christ healed some people, other people he didn't. Why? Who knows? Who knows why? But I mean, it's there's so many factors that go into actual healing, and so the degree may differ. And for some people, that might not be a path they want to go on. And I get that. I totally get that. It's a hard path. You really have to look at yourself. It's very painful. It's the only thing I would say is, as you mentioned before, that, people say, oh, you just have to accept it. But people are actually trying to say that pursuing any sort of change is harmful, which, I don't see where you can say that it's harmful. If it may not work, that's true. We have to be honest with ourselves. It may not work to the same degree for everybody else, but we're all in different places. And I think even you could probably cite the statistics better than I could. Even Joseph Nicolosi, he said that he experienced about a third of his clients that experienced an almost complete change, another third that experienced some change, and a third that experienced none at all. And so my thinking is, and he said even among those that didn't experience full change, he felt that they found the process to be, most of them found the process to be at least enlightening, where they were able, even if they went and chose to adopt a gay identity, they at least had some insight going into that. And I think that's what's really important here, is that people have the opportunity to choose, let that to take a look at that. If it doesn't work for you, nobody says you have to do it. Everybody's got free will.
Yeah. And it's not always going to be through therapy, like in your story, and most of us through other means that
Yes.
God brought about a maturing process and a healing process. So what were some of the things, if you could share briefly, the factors that contributed to your own same-sex attraction as far as you were able to discover?
Well, there was definitely a broken, I mean, as you probably know from your own work, broken father relationship. My father was very physically abusive. And he was very unpredictable, volatile, angry. Now, this is not to say that he was a bad father in all respects. He wasn't. He was a good provider. He did the best he could, but in his own woundedness that he didn't look at, he just could not give me what I needed from him emotionally. And then in addition to that, with the physical abuse, it really kind of shut off the world of men to me. I viewed men to be like him, even though I really didn't necessarily have a basis for that. I viewed the world of men through the way he treated me. And that's what kind of started me off on that path. And then, of course, if you don't have that affirmation from the father, well, you don't really know how to get it from other men or boys either. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And I became more and more isolated and afraid of men until I actually started to kind of face my fears and start to get to know the world of men and masculinity. And a lot of that was growing to know that I had to do that on the masculine world's terms, not on my own terms. I had to say, okay, well, this is the masculine world. I think I tended to, because of my dad, vilify anything that I saw as too masculine, and idolize that which was more feminine, instead of really kind of seeing that both men and women have their good points and their bad points, and but also accepting the fact that God created me to be a man, and this is the area that I had to grow in to become a man among other men. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, yeah. That's, I mean, well, it's very, I hate to say it, but it's very textbook in a lot of ways. About probably 3/4 of the clients we work with have very similar stories.
Yes.
And I know there's always exceptions. That's why I say 3/4. But
right.
There often is the lack of identification with your own sex, to the point where you feel categorically different.
Right.
So it's like, I just don't have what it takes to be part of that world.
That's right.
And so going back, when did you start to notice that that was the way you're viewing yourself? What were some of the key moments or memories that were imprinted there?
I always felt different. Like when we talk about people, we talk to most men who identify as gay, they'll say, oh, I always knew there was something different about me. There was something where I didn't fit. And I always felt that way, even when I was much younger, which, the break with my father happened, of course, much younger than my teenage years, when I was much younger than my teenage years. But I always kind of felt different and off, I could never really put my finger on it. I think I was always very attracted to the masculine, even before it was sexualized, but at the same time afraid.
Hmm.
So it was like an ambivalence there that I had. Um, but where I really, I mean, to cut to the chase, where I really experienced it was, and I think I was kind of a little bit naive, as I was growing up. I didn't get it that, I didn't get that I was attracted to men and boys my age, and that this was actually what was supposed to happen with most boys, with girls. And then I started gradually figuring it out that, wait a minute here, I'm thinking about boys the way they're thinking about girls. And I'm like, and I knew what that was. I mean, I knew what homosexuality was. I mean, this is back in the 80s, so it was still somewhat closeted,
Hmm.
I still knew what that was. I just didn't know that that applied to me. And
Hmm.
then I kind of figured it out like right before, as I'm going into high school, and I thought, oh geez, like, oh, this is me here. This I'm going through this thing that everybody calls being gay, and I think I just emotionally just walled off and shut off a part of myself at that moment, because I just wanted to keep that dirty little secret, my own dirty little secret. But of course, the more you isolate, the worse it gets. And I really just, I think, isolated myself into a fantasy world. I think even though I eventually became an English teacher, it was born of almost an obsession with books, like an escapism from the
Hmm.
world and relationships. I ironically don't read very much right now. I mean, as I'm getting older, um, but but that's really where it came from, and then it just kept getting reinforced. And the more isolated I became, the less and less connectable I became to other men, and it just created a self-fulfilling prophecy in me that I
Hmm.
really wasn't good enough, I wasn't man enough, and I really just didn't belong in the world of men. Um, and then, eventually, but when the Lord really opened my eyes, then I started realizing that, hey, wait a minute, I do. I said, this is hard, but I can do this. I can figure this out. I get it. I mean, we're talking years and years and years here. I'm oversimplifying for the interest of time. So it wasn't
Sure.
just like I woke up one day and said, "Oh, good, I feel like a man." I mean, that's not the way it went at all. There was a lot of backsliding, insecurity, pain, that sort of thing that I really had to work through. And this is advice that I always give anybody, not only with same-sex attraction, but with anything. I say, if something causes you pain, go toward the pain, because that's where the healing is. Go toward that pain and ask the Lord to reveal that to you, what that pain is. Uh, you know, uh, John Paul II in Theology of the body, and it alone makes visible that which is invisible. And then the other teaching I actually have on my website is from the Second Vatican Council. Jesus Christ fully reveals man to himself.
Hmm.
Makes his supreme calling clear. And that is so true. And that's always been my prayer, is that teaching from the Second Vatican Council. Lord Jesus, reveal me to myself. Let me see you. Let me see myself as you see me. Bring me the healing you want to bring me.
Actually, since you're kind of actually that's serving as a segue to go back a bit to what you're saying about the fantasy. You
Okay.
were when you're going into books and kind of isolating yourself. Um, how did that impact your ability to see yourself?
Well, I was going into, and there's nothing wrong with reading. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
know.
great. It's,
Love
I don't want to
books.
discourage reading. That's good. That's a good thing. But it really, I think the materials that I would read tended to give me, and I would guess I probably read books that were more oriented toward females. I mean, I read a lot of Anne Rice books, which is they're very, homoerotic, the vampire novels and everything. That's well before Twilight and all that. I never read the Twilight. Twilight's past my age here. It's definitely past my time. Um, the and when I started reading the books like that, it was it was just more of a, it was almost uh, I could read about men without actually having to participate in the world of men.
Yeah.
So it just kind of led to the imagination and created images for myself that weren't necessarily weren't reality, which I go into my book too. The thing about the Fight Club, the Fight Club was really an instrumental movie for me, even though I have my issues with it. I think there's some stuff in there that's not so great, but Fight Club and the idea of creating this illusion of masculinity rather than actual masculinity, both in myself and others, I think is something that was really ultimately very damaging to me, rather than actually trying to insert myself into that world and learn who people really are, who men really are, and that men are not stereotypically one way. All men are not the way my father was. All men, there are men out there who are kind, sensitive, strong, loving, willing to enter into kind of intimacy with me beyond these images. So go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was going to bring up, because you also mentioned WWF
Oh yeah.
with wrestling, and how did that factor into the fantasy world as well?
Oh, well, you've got these hyper masculine men, and that's WWF, bodybuilding, whatever. Just these, it's really like the male Barbie dolls. Like, most men just don't look like that, and I think it represented for me, you had these really hyper masculine men, which almost nobody looks like, and you had them wrestling in very close proximity with each other. So there was that idea of the athleticism, the intimacy. Really, they're beating the crap out of each other. There's that idea, that closeness, that physical closeness, that I think that was very attractive to me. But what that reinforced, was more of a sexualized view of men rather than an actual view of men. I would say, much as a Barbie doll would sexualize women to a body that they would not, that they cannot really have biologically.
Mm-hmm. So you start developing the attractions toward the same sex at a certain age in adolescence. And did you share this with anyone? Did you come out in some way or disclose this as a struggle? What did you do with these feelings that you were noticing?
Oh, I did not. I stuffed them down.
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't gonna share that with anybody. No, I stuffed them down. And then finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Like, it was just tearing me apart, because I was just seeing, you know, and especially in college. Back when I was in college, again, most it was just starting to be cool to be gay. Now it's the thing. And it's permeating high schools and everything else, and there's recruitment and that sort of thing. But I'm seeing what little there was when I was in college, and I'm thinking, all right, well, these guys look like they're pretty happy. I'm not feeling real happy right now. So I started wondering, well, maybe they're right. And I constantly had that struggle, because I knew that I knew based on my faith that it was not part of God's plan, that men having sex with men is not part of God's plan. So I was always convinced of that truth, but to live that, knowing that I had these attractions, was very difficult. So it finally came to a head, and I finally shared with my campus minister, who was a priest at the college where I went to school, and he was amazing. He has since gone to his reward, but he was really amazing. And he's not somebody that theologically we were very close. He was probably a little more left of center than I would have been even back in the day, but he really did share acceptance and love. Um, but he never encouraged me to pursue any sort of a homosexual lifestyle. He was really good at say, the church's call to remain chaste. And he really didn't tell me much one way or the other. We never discussed healing or anything like that. He was just supportive where I was. So he was very instrumental. And for a long time, he was the only one that I ever told. And then I started gradually telling more priests. And I've heard some people, have horror stories about when they told priests, and the priest telling them, "Oh, you should just get a monogamous relationship," and things like that. I never had that. All the priests that I talked to were very firm in the truth, but very loving. I also never heard this. I never experienced the scary story either, where the priest says, "You're terrible. How could you?" I never heard that either. I always had the priests that were really good at mediating the love of Jesus Christ and trying to be as supportive as they could, and even if they weren't 100% knowledgeable in what they were saying, they always stuck to the truth in a loving way as best they could. So, and then eventually I gradually started sharing with other people and on a very limited basis, and it grew from there. So it was a process. It was not something that happened overnight.
And that's the majority of your book is really, you give a little bit of background on the terminology and what likely contributed to your same-sex attraction as far as you're able to tell. But then the majority of the book is your process of healing. And I love how the book is written. The chapters are pretty short. They're like mostly about a certain theme or an experience. And so it really kind of hit the main points very well. And I couldn't help but think as I'm reading the book and the different things that contributed to your own healing process, your journey, was God's providence.
Yes.
And there's so many different events that came up that were instrumental in your own healing. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to share just maybe a few of those main highlights of the different ways, those graces, as you guys would say, that God bestowed upon you, blessed you with, that sort of showed he's with you in this and he's got a plan.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That the first was probably when I went to confession at the Basilica in Fatima, and I had the most amazing experience of God's healing and grace coming through that confession. I had been to confession so many times before that particular moment, but that one confession was just so instrumental in putting me on the path of freedom and wholeness, and really experiencing Jesus Christ in a way that I had never experienced him before. And then from that confession, I ended up confiding in somebody else there who was going through very similar things. So it kind of gave me hope that, hey, there is something out there for me, maybe. I don't know if I'll. What's that?
That chapter was I was just beaming as I read that chapter, because when you tell the story about confessing to the priest, and you do such a good job painting the picture of how nervous you were, and you're like, oh, I just know the priest knows what I'm talking about. You're trying to use vague language at first, I think, and then you come out, you really say what it was, and you're like, oh, he's probably gonna think I'm this terrible person. And I think the way you describe the priest, he knew something. He knew something you didn't know, and he had like this glimmer in his eye, the way you describe it. And I just think about the providence of God in that moment. How much God showed up there by you going on this pilgrimage, and there being that priest who happens to know what he's talking about. I mean, how many priests have been ill-equipped to address this issue? And this priest responded in the wisest way. And he actually knew something about dealing with same-sex attraction because of other people he's worked with or he's come across. So maybe if you could describe that a little bit more, what his response was when you shared with him a little more than just a vagueness of what you were dealing with.
Well, when I finally got down to the nitty gritty, and I told him what was going on, the first thing I told him was that I was angry with God for having made me this way. And that was the first thing he said. Well, why are you angry at God about that? And I said, well, because I have these attractions and I don't know what to do with them, because I feel like they're a part of who I am, and the teaching of the Bible and the church, they're saying that I can't do this. So I am angry with God for giving me these desires that I can't act upon.
Mm,
I don't know how to get rid of this anger at God. And the first thing he said to me was, well, I don't know if it was the first thing, but one of the things he said to me was, he says, he said, people blame God for all sorts of things that he didn't do. You don't know that God did this to you. He said, and even, no matter what, he has a purpose for you. And I had never really heard it presented that way before. He said, God can heal you. And I'd like, huh?
mm,
What are you talking about? And I said, I've never heard that before. He goes, yeah. He said, excuse me. He said, yeah, he said, God can do this for you. You have to, do you believe in Jesus Christ and, in his power? And I'm like, well, that's a really good question. I guess I really kind of don't. I mean, I thought I
mm,
was brought up Catholic. I could count on before COVID, I could count on two hands how many times I had missed mass my entire life. Like, I always went to mass. I always partook of the sacraments. I considered myself a good Catholic, but so I felt like I always knew about him, but didn't know him and didn't know that he knew me and was interested in my life. And I think that's what got mediated. And the healing that happened that night was when we talked a lot about that sort of thing, which was kind of blowing my mind. I had to do more research on it because I don't know that I could really absorb the impact of everything he was saying. But
mm.
I said, but Father, no matter what, I still feel this anger at God and I can't get rid of that. And he said, oh, God's going to heal that of you. God is going to heal that for you tonight.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, how do you know that? And so he did, and he said the words of absolution after confession. And I just felt this burden just gone instantly gone.
Hmm.
And I wasn't angry anymore. I'm like, well, that's really something else. So could God heal you instantly of things? He sure can. I don't think that's always the way he works. I think it's a more of a process usually. But this particular thing, that anger was just gone right from that moment. I've
Hmm.
never had that anger come back.
And
And
it's the faith of that priest. He just spoke with such confidence in what God would do. I so
absolutely.
appreciated that.
Yeah, he really did. And it was, there's, I've had other similar experiences, down the line, not just with that, but with other, not only priests, but other people that just have gotten words like that have really ministered to my heart. But that was really the instrumental change, was having that absolution and having that anger just removed, just instantly gone.
Hmm. And then you started to build a bit of a support system there. You met another friend there on the retreat who uh, you could actually confide in, and so God provided. And one of the other things that stood out to me was how God provided a brotherhood for you, particularly when
Yes.
you went to college. Could you share about that a bit?
Oh yeah, that is just so instrumental. And I said, if I could give a gift, if God said to me, hey, what do you want me to do for every man who experiences same-sex attraction? I would say give them a brotherhood, Lord. That's the one gift I just can't give. Like, I'm just not capable. It's just me. But give them a brotherhood. And I did. When I went to Franciscan University, they have this thing called a household system. And it's like a fraternity, but it's more like a covenant community. And it's basically a bunch of guys that get together and enter into a covenant relationship with each other, and we take a solemn covenant to each other and before God, to help each other get to heaven, basically. And and I had started building friendships with other men gradually, even before then. But that was the moment that I knew I had found this group of guys who loved me unconditionally and would support me and be there for me. And they were all so different. There was such a motley crew of guys who just did like none of us really had anything in common, unless except for the fact that we were all in this covenant community together. So I got to really see the spectrum of different men all trying to live out the Lord's will in their lives in very different ways, even ways that I would never think to do, that I just, is not my way of being. But having that and just knowing that they were always there for me was such a, even today, I mean, whenever I'm going to, interview with somebody or talk with somebody, I ask them to pray. If they know all about me. And it's funny because you they sometimes make jokes just to be stupid guys about it. But it's so freeing to be able to joke about it and know that I'm still loved, that they still have my back, and that they're always there for me and I'm there for them. And this is going back over 20 years. This has been a brotherhood that's been there for over 20 years. We're all over the country. We don't see each other often. We get together for reunions every so often. But we're in contact almost every day through email. Like we just have a group, a groups list that we do. And sometimes people start getting into like their real issues and their prayers and what they really need, their family strife and things like that. Other times it's stupid boy banter, and it goes back and forth, and it's very refreshing and light just to know that you can go to the depths and then just get totally stupid with each other at the same time. And just having that freedom to do that with each other is really what has been a tremendous source of healing for me.
And you said they all now they're aware of your background, the same-sex attraction struggle that you had, but didn't start off knowing that. What was that experience like for you to open up to them?
It was interesting. I was pretty nervous when I told them all, since I told them all more recently. So it was not anything I could do in person. So it was through this group that we're on, and just some of them were just like, I gotta process this. I can't really talk about this. But nobody outright rejected me. And eventually, like the people that were, I got to process it. They did. They came back. They processed it. We talked. And so it was hard. It was hard because I really, and I did it, immediately before I had the book published. That was when I told them, because, I figured of all people, I wanted them to know first. And and I've had, one of my brothers came to me and said, look, I've got a family member. I really enjoyed your book. Actually more than one has come to me and said, I have a family member that's struggling with this. How do I handle it? What do I say? So, it's been really a blessing, for me to be able to share that. And honestly, I think that being able to share that, and we do have to discern carefully who we share with, because there are people who, might not be able to handle it. But for the most part, for me, being able to share that part of myself with other men who don't struggle in that exact same way has been very affirming. Knowing that they know about me and they've shared their struggles with me as well, which aren't the same, but we can mutually support each other. That's really the beauty of that. When you find that brotherhood, that you really know they have your back and you have their back, just so instrumental in healing. And like I said, I wish that's a gift that I wish I could give to any man who is feeling insecure about his sexuality, is that gift of brotherhood.
Yep, that's my heart as well. When I led for 8 years a support group on campus at the college where I counsel now, and I just did that as a lay counselor. I wasn't a therapist yet. I was a graduate, and we didn't have any counseling services on campus. I wanted to leave the school in a better place, and I wanted it to be a brotherhood. And it was mixed. It wasn't just guys with same-sex attraction. It was guys with SSA issues and guys with heterosexual pornography and sexual addiction issues and trauma backgrounds and anger issues and abuse background. There's all this stuff. And to see them form that brotherhood and really bond, it really is, it's the microcosm of what the church is supposed to be like.
That's right. Absolutely. So, 100%.
Yeah. What were some of the other elements that were major contributors to your healing process?
Those were the two, the spirituality and prayer, the brotherhood. They were probably the main ones. The other thing is, with the prayer and everything is really, that's probably the thing people find the hardest, is to really look at myself, at all the parts of myself that I kind of wish weren't there,
Mm,
and bring those to the light and acknowledge them and work on healing that. And that's something that is, I mean, the same-sex attraction is one thing, but having, more or less, uh, I want to say not completely healed, but gotten to a place where I was comfortable functioning as a heterosexual man when I got married. And this is probably not so much in the book because this happened much later. When I got married, the same-sex attraction, I mean, the ironic thing is, all the biggest problems that any marriage has problems, but all the biggest problems we've ever had didn't have anything to do with same-sex attraction, but rather my own fallenness, my own selfishness, and things like that. So
mm,
marriage itself has been a gift for me to grow in holiness as well. Not so much for same-sex attraction, but it more in general. Um, Certainly, marriage does not heal same-sex attraction. That's something that, same-sex attraction is usually a lack of connection with men. So getting married is not going to help fulfill that, because a woman can't give what a man can,
mm,
in that way. But later on, as I started dealing with the same-sex attraction issues, it's like an onion. You deal with one set of issues, and then there's another set of issues underneath that are feeding it, but aren't really the presenting problem. And so gradually, getting to the root of my own selfishness, I think, is really what moved me, into more healing and wholeness and integration,
mm.
overcoming my sinful, selfish and prideful self. Um, Started through same-sex attraction, and then, got more and more to the root as I've gotten older, and continued on this road. So I don't know if that's what you were actually asking me, but that's what I was.
No, that's also good. And I'm also wondering, how did you know you're ready to pursue marriage?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, actually. I don't think there's a hard and fast answer to that, but I will say that, when I knew what I needed to do to pursue healing of same-sex attraction, I pursued men all the time, not as sexual partners, but as friends. I was always looking to expand my circle of male friends. Like, I always made sure I put myself where I could be with men, learn from men, learn about men, maybe get some new friendships. And I did that for a long time. And after a while, I started getting, I don't want to say a little bored with it, but, uh, feeling like I needed something more. And then that's when I started pursuing, actual dating relationships. And it was kind of concurrent. Like, I was still working on some stuff, but I had gotten to the point where I felt comfortable enough with my own masculinity and sexual identity to start pursuing, dating women.
Hmm.
But the way I knew I needed to do it is because what I was doing just wasn't filling me up the way it used to.
Mm,
I knew that I had gotten to a point where I needed to move on. I would say the same thing happened with, having kids. When you're
mm,
when you're when you're married, and you're like, okay, well, then I'm to the point where I feel like we really need to take this to the next step. I think the
yeah.
Lord's calling us to the next step. So that's where it came with me, and I can't give you like a hard and fast rule. I think it's different for every guy, and even after I got to that point of healing where I was married, there were times, especially after we started having kids, when those insecurities came back, and I really had to fight, you know, yeah, because when you have kids, it takes away your ability to focus on yourself. Somebody else needs you constantly.
Mm,
And, I had to kind of reinvent myself again once I had kids. That's why I always advise men who say, well, the very question you asked, how do I know when I'm ready to get married? Just make sure that you're comfortable enough to be able to function when you may not be able to get the support you need in the amount that you need it and to the degree that you need it. And there's no hard and fast rule for that. But that's how I knew, was that I was looking for something more. I knew I couldn't get that from just men, that the Lord was calling me to something deeper, to give of myself in marriage.
Yeah, and that it really speaks to what I'm hearing from you. Is it's like that desire for that male connection was satisfied sufficiently, even though you're going to have to continue to maintain, because it's a regular need every man has, same-sex attraction background or not, every man needs that.
Right.
So it's going to be something you have to maintain, but it got to the place where you're coming from such a place of deficit that you need to get back to a baseline.
Right.
And it's like, once you got there, you realize, it's like, got to this point where you realize I'm not getting the same thing from guys like I used to.
Right.
It's like it's saturated now.
Right.
And
Right.
so there's something more. And
right.
So what is the next thing? It was now, well, you already were experiencing this with your brotherhood, is how much you can be a gift as well. You have something of value to impart to other men. But now, as that relationship is fulfilled more, the next application of being a gift is to be a gift as the opposite sex. So it sounds like there was the drive now to really fulfill the next level of applying being a gift and giving of yourself to a woman.
Yes. And funny you should say that. I mean, that's that theology of the body language, a total donation of oneself to another. That's really what it is. And the theology of the body, the sexual union between men and women is the symbol of heaven. It's why everybody wants it so much, because obviously we're not going to be having sex in heaven, but if sex on earth is that great, then just imagine what heaven's going to be like, when it's really that's the taste of heaven. That's the sign of heaven, is the nuptial embrace.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good segue to one of my last questions here. Is any other ways in which you see the theology of the body playing a role in your story and in the work that you do?
Oh, absolutely. I particularly got a lot out of Christopher West, as you did too. I heard him talk a couple of times, never took actually any courses. I had listened to his, back then they were cassette tapes. I mean, that's how far back I'm going here. Yeah. And then CDs and things like that. But his Naked Without Shame series was just so instrumental. The idea that I think that the main idea from theology of the body is that our sexuality is not a side issue. It's not, I'm going to become a saint despite my sexuality. No, I'm going to become a saint because of my sexuality. That's the central issue. Once I learned that was kind of a game changer, that this was not something I needed to fight against, but to struggle with and move forward, carrying the cross of Christ with, and let him transform that into what he wanted it to be. And I think that's really the great gift of the theology of the body that really helped me to see, especially to view sex, as the primordial, what John Paul II calls the primordial sacrament, and as the foretaste of heaven, is really just amazing to me. That's really, I think, what blew my mind. Ironically, John Paul II actually teaches very little about homosexuality and theology of the body. He really doesn't focus on it. There's only like 2 passages where he actually really even somewhat addresses it. But really, with our bodies, we do express God's plan. Our bodies really do tell God's story. That's what He wants, and that's why I think sex between a married man and woman is so under attack today, because the devil can never create anything new. He just twists and destroys what's there, and that's the other thing when you asked the untwisting of the lies.
Mhm.
What's true about my needs as a man? What's true is that I need to love and be loved by other men and enjoy intimacy with other men. What's false is that I have to have sex with other men to do that.
Mhm.
And it's the separation, it's the untwisting of that lie. Because we really don't need both. We really only need the one. We need love and acceptance and intimacy. And that's really the only proper expression for sex is between a man and a woman. But that doesn't mean that we don't need and want and desire love from our own sex as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll always be a need
Right.
that we need to maintain. It's one thing I often. I was just meeting with a new client today, and the battle. There's going to be three battle fronts in the work we'll be doing. One is excavating, going to the past. We use the attractions as a window into the past to see where things have been twisted. Either there's a wound there or there's a distorted belief about yourself. And so we're
Right.
going to be doing work in the past. We're also going to be doing work in the present in um, sort of developing a bit of an approach of acceptance for the experience of the attractions, so that you're not constantly judging yourself and condemning yourself for having had the experiences, but just
Right.
learn to accept it and just let it wash over you and realize it's okay. It's just an experience. It does not define who I am. So tolerating the feelings that may still linger even after experiencing a significant amount of change.
Right.
And then the
Right.
other battlefront is continually meeting your needs, your basic God-given needs in healthy, godly ways. And that will
Right.
be an
Right.
ongoing thing. So sort of the three battlefronts that we're working in when doing this type of counseling. So yeah,
Absolutely.
you hit it on it right there. Um, Before we wrap up, I wonder if you could share a little bit. You have the appendix at the end of the book of some basic tips for someone who's struggling with some sexual attraction issues. Uh, would you mind just sort of reviewing some of those basic guidelines or counsel that you provide there?
Well, yeah, I would say that the main thing is to we probably actually hit on a lot of them. The idea of brotherhood, connecting with other men, getting involved where there are men, seeing men in community, experiencing men in community, looking at oneself, looking at maybe the biographies of men you admire. For me, the John Paul II biographies were amazing. I really have such a great admiration for John Paul II, and but really any type of uh, man that you can relate to, and of course the Gospels themselves. I mean, there's no better example of true masculinity than Jesus Christ Himself. Getting
Yeah.
to know Jesus Christ through the Gospels, getting that personal relationship with Him, and um, and also getting involved in a faith life. For me, it was through the sacraments. However, whatever church you belong to, just availing yourself of that spirituality, particularly if there's that men's groups and things like that where you can really, kind of go deep, with your own group. Um, and just really, it's not a one and done thing. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly looking at ourselves and seeking wholeness and healing. It's not like, okay, I got that, I did that today, so I guess I'm done. No, you're gonna have to keep going back to that. It's a process. That's what I would say. It's a process.
Yeah.
And there's different ways to do it. There's some principles that seem to work for a lot of people, but guys, come to their conclusions sometimes through different paths. There's more than one way to Christ. There's everybody's not built to experience it the same way. But the tips that I have in the back of the book are what worked for me, and I think most of those are really what's going to work, because they are the basic Christian walk for anybody.
Yeah, that's what I found. Like, this is pretty universal. Just sound counsel for guys. So,
Yes.
the book is When the Sun Frees You. AJ, where can people pick it up, and how else can they reach you?
Well, they can go to my website. There is a contact me tab. Just click on that. I usually respond to emails pretty quick. As far as getting the book, any bookseller right now still has it, as long as that lasts.
Good.
Right now, you can get it from anywhere. Anywhere books are sold, or you can get it directly from the publisher. TAN, like being in the sun too long. So TAN Books, they're my publisher, or any other of your favorite bookseller, at least for the moment, still has it. You can get it on Kindle or in text form and hardcover form. With Kindle, I didn't realize this, but you can do the speak feature, which will actually turn it into an audio book. I don't have a specific audio book, but yeah, you can get the Kindle, and I've done that with a number of books, and it's got that robotic voice, but once you get used to that, it works pretty well. I've read a number of books that way. So if you don't have the time to actually sit down and read the book, you can get the Kindle, and I think it's text to speak. I think it's called. It's that function, and it will read the book for you.
Good idea. I consume a lot of books just through audio now these days. So busy. So
right.
Well, AJ, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and
likewise.
I really enjoyed the book. I just want everyone to get it, especially if you're just looking for encouragement of someone who's walked through this road and experienced their own sort of progress in dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction or any sort of besetting sin or constant temptation. You just need an encouraging story, but also how to equip yourself if you don't struggle with this issue yourself, but you have someone in your life that does, or you want to be equipped to be a good brother to someone else. For me, as someone who does not have a background in same-sex attraction, I still always believed it was my duty as a fellow believer to be equipped to be there as a brother for some other friends who might have a struggle. And so this may not be your personal background, but do what you can to equip yourself to be ready in season and out of season for when you have a brother who's in need. So I'd encourage anyone to pick it up. So,
amen.
Once again, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch, of course. So I'm gonna encourage people to check out your website and check out the other interviews and your blog articles there.
Absolutely.
And so you have a good night. Take care, AJ.
Hey, you too. Thank you very much for everything. It's been awesome. Love talking to you.
God bless.
Take care, my brother.